Good afternoon. Welcome again to the offices of El Tiempo Portafolio in Bogota, where once again the Canadian Council for the Americas, in association with El Tiempo and Portafolio, is presenting our fourth live from Colombia webcast. The title of this one is Rolling in the Waves, and I suspect that consciously or subconsciously we came up with that title because we were influenced by the cover of this week's Semana magazine that just came out a few days ago, which shows a President Duque at the helm of a boat taking on a lot of water. His ship, his cap is falling off his head, and he looks in a fair amount of distress. And there's already the subtitle that says, "Is it time to rework the government or make changes already in the government?" This after only 4 months in office. So to help us understand what's going on and to work through the issues that got us to this point, assuming that we all agree that this is a fair, more or less, representation of the state of matters in Colombia, we have Ricardo Avila with us, who is the editor-in-chief of Portafolio, the business newspaper of record in Colombia, and deputy editor of El Tiempo, the general newspaper of record in Colombia. And we have Poli Martinez, who is a columnist for Semana magazine, as well as a columnist and writer for ABC newspaper in Spain. So, Ricardo, we'll start with you. Is this a fair assessment of what's going on?
Well, according to the polls, Ivan Duque's ratings are the lowest of any president during his first 100 days in the history of Colombia, as long since we have polls. So I believe his has been a rocky start, and it is an unpopular government, and it is true that people are unsatisfied with the way things are being managed. According to a poll we published in the newspaper a week ago, Duque's negative ratings were at 67%, and that's quite a high number. And he's almost as unpopular as Juan Manuel Santos was during his difficult days after he had spent many years in office. So of course there is reason for concern, because the ability of the government to pass reforms is tied to this.
So the public is always right.
Well, the public is always right. It's like
the voters, the voting public is always right. Poli, what do you think? Is this a fair assessment?
Yes, I think it is. It's amazing, on the other hand, because we wouldn't have thought that this would happen so soon into office. So nobody really understands why he hasn't had like the honeymoon every president used to have. He has majority in Congress. He has the main congressional party on his behalf, and things are not working. So it's not easy to understand why, and reforms are very laid back, and it's like this feeling that things are not working, and things are like walking on mud or something like that, and things are not coming out as expected.
Yeah, it's on one level, it's not 100% surprising, and we talked about this in our previous events. Someone who came to office with very little government experience, spent a lot of time at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, spent a little bit of time in Congress, but not a long time, not a creature of the political machine, or the political life or career, as it were, and also came with a lot of dissension in the party that put him forward. There was always going to be people in the party of Senator, ex-President Uribe, who did not want him at all, and it was very clear that he was going to have a hard time winning them over. And now it appears that perhaps they're some of his worst critics who are making it different. Are you surprised by this? Or completely surprised by this?
Well, a little. Well, first, in a sense, Duque has faced sort of a perfect storm. First, his party doesn't support him completely, and even President Uribe, his mentor, said things at the beginning of Duque's government that undermine his stature. Second, his Minister of Finance went through a very difficult debate regarding a scandal of some bonds that were issued several years ago, where he acted as an advisor to this financial operation. Third, he presented what in practical terms is a tax reform that proposed increasing the base of the VAT, which is partially excluded in Colombia, to many other products, including staples and basic services. And at the same time, he faced dissent from university students from public universities, and he wasn't able to solve this, and this ended up in different manifestations throughout the country, marches and protests, and in that sense he also was seen as being ineffective in dealing with day-to-day challenges. So again, that's one of the explanation of his poor record. It is absolutely clear that the most damaging issue for his popularity was the tax proposal.
Yeah, and that was the one he led with right out of the box.
Yeah.
Right. So you're right. From the minute it started, there was the accusations against the finance minister Carrasquilla for the bond operation that went on when he was out of the government, allegedly based on information and things he knew when he was inside the government, that ended up to being very bad consequences for a number of towns and cities throughout Colombia who couldn't repay their bonds. Paulie, could it have started in a different way? Was it if once it seemed like it compounded. I'm trying to figure out where did the wheels come off so fast. And there was Minister Carrasquilla's controversy we talked about, but then it followed. The first thing really out of the gate was the budget proposal, and that didn't go well at all. Do you think it could have been handled differently politically, or do you think it was just a fight he was going to have, and he has to pay the consequences for it?
I think it has two sides to that. It could have been worked differently from the political point of view. Stan, if he had had enough support from his own party and would have made enough agreements with others to put the reform through. So as I was saying, Carrasquilla, the minister, had like a weak floor on which to stand. Opposition wasn't working as it was supposed to be, and Duque didn't have enough stand to for a good debate around the tax reform. I think it was like the first big issue that the country came to. And on the other hand, we've had not lots, but some problems on the public security front, from social, all the peace process and the implementation. So it hasn't been very easy for him, and he doesn't have ministers that are political. So there's no way he can talk with Congress. He was supposed to talk through the Centro Democrático, but he didn't have the support of his own party. So I think it's like a mixture of things. It's not usual that things happen the way they have developed.
We're talking about Ricardo's perfect storm. Okay, well, let's go a few of the major issues that we talked about. Well, we're just talking about the budget. Let's have a little bit of a discussion about that. I know it's Ricardo. You've been writing about this. You actually had a video article or commentary, I think it was just yesterday, about this issue. The current government came in and said that there was a fiscal deficit, or a hole, as they would call it, of about $6.5 billion US, if I'm not mistaken. The outgoing government said that was a fictitious number, and not even real. And at the end, and so the original proposal was designed to deal with that fiscal hole that the current government said was there. And at the end of the day, they've ended up with, appears that they're ending up with a bill that may only close half of that hole. And it begs the question as well, then what happens? What happens in a few years from now when this hole keeps getting bigger and bigger, according to their estimate, and what kind of situation is Colombia going to be in then, let alone what it is now, when it's not actually satisfying any of what it considered to be the exigencies. Ricardo, you want to talk about whether in fact that $6.5 billion was completely true, or was a bit of fiction in that?
No, there was a little bit of fiction in the sense that they came into power and asked each ministry what they would like to receive in budgetary terms. And of course, the shopping list came and it was impossible to finance, so they cut that almost in half. But at the end, they presented an unbalanced budget, and that's why they had to go to Congress and present a finance law that would finance this gap of around a little bit less than $5 billion. At the end, they are not going to get that because since the government is weak, basically they lost control of the proposal in Congress. And instead of this being driven by the Ministry of Finance, this is being driven by people in Congress. And I have called this law a Frankenstein law because it's a patch of many proposals, not necessarily coherent. And the biggest concern is that yes, it will solve the problem partially for 2019, but after 2020, actually the revenues for the government are going to be less because of the tax discounts that are being introduced, and that will exacerbate Colombia's fiscal deficit, and that won't play well at all before the risk credit agencies. And of course, the huge concern that economists have is that Colombia might lose its investment rate. I hope that is not the case, but things are not headed in the right direction.
Well, the mystifying thing about this, and I think it was one of the things that you mentioned yesterday, was the government and President Duque himself actually never came out vocally in support of this. In fact, there was even some discrepancy at the beginning about some aspects of it. For example, as Ricardo mentioned, the taxing of the basic staples that the family has, which has been tax exempt in Colombia, which was going to then, the original bill was then going to tax it. And then there was some discrepancy, and that's where the issue of ex-President Uribe actually came out against something that President Duque's government was supporting, but President Duque never really came out in any forceful way to make a political case, and the finance minister really didn't as well. And that goes, Paulie, a little bit to what you were saying, is some may be good technocrats at what they're doing, but there's also no political skill or street smarts is how to manage it. So do you, and so do you think part of this was that the government absence sort of exacerbated the situation? Could this have been some situation that the government might have salvaged somehow if they had handled it politically in a different way?
I think it would have been difficult because of how the proposal was structured from the beginning. You would have to have lots of muscle and power, political power, to pass through the VAT, this tax for the family staples. It would have been very difficult. You would have to be like this very strong president with all the backing and everybody ready and understanding why they were playing it that way. So no, I think it anyway would have been very difficult. What surprises me is that when Duque came in, he said, "I have everything ready. You know, I've written this proposals, this 1, 2, 3, any number of reforms, and none of what he has presented has come through. He proposes something, and then he has to go back and present again something. So every time, every week, he's losing a little bit more of ground, which is the worst place you can be as a president. Because yes, you can go wrong on something and make things better, and then over that gain some political power. But he has been losing on and on and on. So we were talking before, just from a political point of view, that when Duque came in and Centro Democrático was reaching for presidency, they said that Santos' government was heading Colombia towards Venezuela from a peace process point of view, from the presence of ex-FARC guerrilla members in Congress. But now you could say that if economic things don't work and people are so angry or really tired that after taxes and after all the reforms, Colombia will be again in 2021 facing a new tax reform, maybe that will really open the way for another type of solution, which is, it's mercenarizing, because we wouldn't expect that Duque's government would at the end it's just supposing that it could end up giving the presidency to a left presidency.
Left wing.
That's
so
right.
Wing instead.
They handed. I'm a left-handed, so yes, a candidate. So it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's
interesting.
The reform you talked about, some of the things you talked about, reforms you wanted to make, and none of them are going anywhere. I mean, there was the issue of the reform of the judicial system, which other presidents have tried to do, and Santos have tried, and appreciate that no one's been successful. But he's made that one of the early centerpieces, the thing that he tabled early on, is a reform that he wanted to do.
The political reform is also in trouble.
The political reform. I mean, and Colombians are sitting here looking longingly at Peru, which voted about 80% for anti-corruption measures, which
and the measures are nowhere.
Yeah, and that was something that President Duque, candidate Duque, said he was for. When he became president, he said he was for. He didn't make a big campaign to push it. It had his party was against it, led principally by former President Uribe. Thank you. And that's gone. That hasn't gone anywhere.
But Kenny, it is also true that he changed the equation before Congress, because before governments used to gain quote-unquote governance in Congress by giving jobs in the executive and by giving budget, or normally.
Fair enough. The mermelada. Then this is another fair follow-up question. And a lot of credit goes to President Duque for ostensibly, as far as you can see, not engaging in that practice, which many people think is the root of a lot of corruption in this country.
Yeah, the question is if he's going to stand the pressure or not.
And the other thing, he hasn't cashed on that, because he could have come out and tell the Colombian people, this is happening somehow because of, I'm not giving out the mermelada, the marmalade, right, or the sweet thing for congressmen.
But the pork.
Yeah, that's right. So, but he hasn't worked on that. What he comes out and says, he's always traveling or doing something else, in the wrong place. When the country needs some type of message, he's never in the right place. He's playing guitar somewhere, he's flying to another place.
But he mentioned something that is absolutely key, and that is sort of the self-inflicted wounds of Duque's presidency. Because, yes, the climate is extremely hostile and all that, but at the same time, the government has made many mistakes, and the president himself. He has been sold as a light president, and instead of taking care of his image, he appears singing or cajoling with reggaeton stars and so on and so forth. and this
he has a decent voice, though.
Yeah, absolutely, and he plays well the guitar. But at the same time, the problem is that this contributes to this image that he is not well suited for the presidency, and that is very damaging for his legitimacy.
So is it then partially just bad communications, bad handling of the messaging, or is that just something of who he is? Why isn't he showing his face? Why is he doing these things that he's doing? Is he not up to the task of going out and arguing and making the political argument and fighting it through?
He's showing his face. That's the way he is.
That's just who he is.
No, I believe that one of the problems he has is that his ministers are a liability for the government, because with, of course, a few exceptions. But most ministers keep an extremely low profile. So the government doesn't have stars that appear and that help or give the impression that the government is in full control of things. So first, his cabinet is a major liability, and as someone said to me, if you compared Duque as a person with, for example, Andrés Pastrana, Duque, the former president between '86 and 1990, in terms of intellectual capabilities, Duque surpasses him by far. But Pastrana's ministers, when he was president, were much more stronger, much more experienced, and had more and commanded more respect before public opinion, and that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen with this administration.
You know what? I wrote a column on that, saying that Duque was not Uribe, was Pastrana, and I compare the 100 days speech that Duque gave with the one that Pastrana gave when he had his 100 days balance, and it was the same. It was amazing, and Pastrana is seen as one of the. It's very controversial. I'm not going to say anything else, but very controversial. So Duque has like the same stamp as Pastrana. It can't be. We had a difficult time, economic time with Pastrana. All the Caguan and the FARC process that he was left behind by Tiro Fijo happened under Pastrana. So Pastrana opened the gate for a president as Uribe, and it was a very difficult time for Colombia. So yes, there's like this lingering thing about Pastrana and
well, were there reforms here to be had if only handled differently? In other words, could the anti-corruption reforms been gone through if without giving mermelada? In other words, is part of what we're saying is if you want to get something through, you have to be dirty about doing it? Or
No.
So if we're not saying that, so then
no, it's a matter of leadership, and he and the president could have put much more pressure on Congress. He basically once made a public call to Congress, say, listen, we have to pass these laws, but he wasn't at the front of the battle. And in that sense, that's why some people are questioning his ability to lead. He has been mostly absent in the case of the finance law, and of course you end up seeing the results. So in that sense, yes, he has some capabilities, but at the same time, it is clear that he has a temperament in which basically he likes collegiate decisions, and sometimes he lacks impulse to say, listen, the buck stops here, as Teddy Roosevelt would say. Yeah.
Fair enough, but going back to the issue of the self-inflicted wounds, segue a little bit to what's going on with the Attorney General right now in Colombia, who has been in a controversial situation going back, if you want want to use U.S. analogies, a little bit back to Watergate, and the question is, what did he know and when did he know it about the Odebrecht scandal? And there's been some information and some videos that have come out that would certainly lead to the conclusion that he's known about it for several years, and in fact, as the accusation goes, has really done nothing about it. And one of the reasons why he hasn't done that much about it is because he's a bit compromised because of the former position he had in the private sector with a company that appears to may have been implicated in a tie-up with Odebrecht. Now, that's a given. He didn't appoint, and he didn't have the power to appoint the Attorney General. So that's a given. He had to take that. But he is at a point now where the hue and cry is, well, at a very minimum, if the Attorney General doesn't resign, should at least recuse himself from matters relating to Odebrecht. And then not even all the matters relating to Odebrecht, at least 3 at this point that they know directly that he had some involvement in. And so that seems to have been agreed upon that they would do. But then the panel of 3 that he could choose, that he's presented to the Supreme Court to choose from, which was all his own doing and had nothing to do with mermelada or pork, completely of his own doing, that has been highly criticized.
He's been shooting his own.
Yes, he's been highly criticized about the quality of the 3 people and the qualifications of the 3 people he's put forward to become the special prosecutor, if we want to use another term from the United States, which is actually in Colombia, although not by law, but it's more a judicial mechanism, borrowed essentially from the U.S. He put these candidates forward who have been roundly criticized. Why? Why did he do what he did there? Is there an explanation? Is it because he wants to control what goes on in that investigation, as some people have alleged? Is it because he's feeling political pressure from other people to appoint someone that may go easy on this, or what's? It's because it's doing a lot of damage to him.
No, absolutely. And the problem is that a problem that was not Duque's, he bought it, and that's a huge mistake. And sort of the first try, in which one of the 3 names resigned to be or submit a resignation in order not to be in the list. I mean, that's a huge mistake by the government. I mean, things like this cannot happen, period, are unacceptable. And because of that, now this issue of the Attorney General and this issue of Odebrecht became, in a sense, entangled with the government. Come on, what a big mistake.
Paulie, what's your view on this?
I think it's going to happen. It's going to be a second mistake because the new 3 alternatives he has given out won't work. None of them are really experts on the how would you call it, the judicial matters. And this process with Odebrecht needs somebody who's really an expert. So they are academics from the president's university, which doesn't mean anything different, that they might be very good lawyers or professors, very good, well-intended, but maybe they don't have the muscle to deal with such a problem.
Or even the criminal law background.
That's right, no criminal law background, none of them at this point. So why did the president appoint them? Nobody really understands, because that would, like the anti-corruption thing, which is, it's very sexy. Everybody hates corruption, and nowadays with polls, it's the first issue that Colombians put as the main problem. And he could have worked himself on that, taking the stance and saying, yes, I'm going to push it through, I'm going to put pressure into Congress to get the bill, to pass the bill, but he didn't do it. Now he has another chance to stand again in front of the people and say, I'm going to pick somebody, or at least the 3 names I'm handing out are very good names, very well reputed, and this is going to work because I'm against all the works of Odebrecht in Colombia. But he hasn't done so. So he has again, a third name of the person who resigned. If you, as a president, come out with three names, it's because you've worked with them and you know that those three names you could have like this, prosecutor. But if somebody resigns, his name that has been presented by the president, it's not very, I don't know, wise, or it says that the president didn't know enough about the issue. And again, on Thursday, the Supreme Court will decide on these three names. And there's a risk that the Supreme Court might say that none of them really are fit to work on this case specifically. So the president is going to have another fall down.
Oh yeah. You know, one of the things I fear from this, or at least I'm noting from this, and how this might also tie into what's come out in the last 24, 48 hours, is the extent now, apparently, of the Russian military involvement in Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
And as we all know, and it's a long standing tradition in any country, when things start to fall apart domestically, or you feel like you're losing control, you bring out the flag and talk about the aspects of defense and national sovereignty, right? It's not just a Colombian thing, it's elsewhere. And so trying to connect a few dots, I'm wondering, Colombia, which has fought so hard, and I think the last election really was the first election where the security itself really wasn't the main issue, right? I mean, it's sort of, with the peace agreement, there are plenty of things that are very problematical about that, and we talked about that in other ones, we could continue doing that. But with this situation with the Russian pilots next door in Venezuela, and the domestic situation, is this sort of a lethal cocktail for somehow distorting, again, the national debate or the priorities to talking about defense of the fatherland, and as a way of sort of rallying the troops around the president? Or is that too far?
No, I believe that
just trying to connect too many dots.
You're like a little bit.
No, what is happening in Venezuela
Check.
is that we know that on January 10th, more than 40 governments are going to cut any ties with the Venezuelan government, because they are not going to recognize Maduro's government when he is sworn in again. And because of that, sort of the political, the diplomatic pressure is rising. Duque's tone has been growing, has been getting stronger also. And in that sense, of course, Venezuela needs to show the world that it's not completely isolated, and that's why it has received first the visit of Erdogan from Turkey, and sort of it has signed agreements with Turkey in exchange for foreign exchange, we'll see, or for food, and also this quote-unquote help from Russia. It shows the world that Venezuela is not quote-unquote alone. So again, this is in a way a diplomatic preemptive strike before what's going to happen at the beginning of January, when most of the countries in America will cut ties with Venezuela, as well as some European countries.
Fair enough, and given the real threat of Venezuela and the pain that Colombia has been feeling because of that, and absorbing the refugees and the real threat on the border, and the implication with the harboring of the ELN and perhaps FARC dissidents in Venezuela. It's not to diminish it, that's a very critical issue, I guess, and I appreciate that the discussion. I guess the one is the very real situation, and the second one is, which I think you talked about a bit, is how will that play out politically in Colombia? Do you think it'll just be another issue amongst these other issues that we're discussing, or do you think it's actually going to become more prominent, which I suggested, but which you guys didn't like? You didn't like that suggestion too much. How do you think this is going to play into the political situation and the discourse?
Duque has Colombian support from the way he has been acting towards Venezuela. He denounced Venezuela and went to the international court, which just up until now has said, I think it was yesterday, the court said who would be like the judges on his demand on Maduro. He's been working like the international arena, which takes lots of time. He has said that diplomacy will be the way he will deal with Venezuela, which is the wisest way. And he has the support of the Colombian people. He doesn't need Venezuela to have like a distraction. Last night, one of the Centro Democráticos members, congressman, had this played this small, like how would you say, article in the political reform, was it? Or yeah, the political reform that said that the suspension of the arrest of the main FARC leaders could be turned back by the president if he calls on national security. This morning, that was a big issue here in Colombia. If you want to distract somebody with something, you do it with that. And it has been said by the people that did the agreement with the FARC here, the negotiators, previous government, that this would kill the agreement with the FARC. So that's a big issue. The debate is very, very strong around that. What's going to happen? Because if the president arguing national security can take or suspend the suspension of the detention of the FARC leaders, then it's going to be a difficult point. And on that, I think President will have the majority agreement of the Colombian people. People think that something else, something hard or a hard line has to be put forward towards the ex-guerrillas or what's going on with ELN and so forth.
So while we talked about the concerns that everybody's had about the president, just finishing up, I think it's fair to say that both of you, and we all agree, that the way he's handled that issue and the diplomacy that you mentioned, Poli, and the pressures coming in Colombia around this security issue and the FARC and the ELN is been a bit it's been somewhat admirable in the sense that he's maintained a bit of a cool head on this and has not tried to respond. Has not tried to respond to every provocation. Is that a fair assessment that he deserves credit for the way he's handled that so far?
I'm going to say something in the border. I was just like last week on the southern border of Venezuela and Colombia. We've had this year 17 attacks from the Guardia Nacional. So yes, he's been.
Ricardo, what's your closing thought about that?
No, well, first I believe that one of the few areas in which Duque receives high marks is his handling of the Venezuelan problem, and also how he has handled the refugee crisis, because let's remember that with figures that we have until the end of September, we already have more than 1 million Venezuelans living in Colombia, plus 300,000 Colombians who used to live in Venezuela and have returned. So this is a huge inflow of people, and the government has handled that well as the provocations coming from Caracas. Let's hope that in this respect the government continue to do things right.
So on that issue at least, and maybe others we could have spoken about, it would give some evidence to what a number of supporters of President Duque have said, not on the extreme right, but he's a centrist just waiting to break out and be considered to be a centrist. And he wants to, and that's really, he wants to govern from that, but for whatever machinations or the way things happen that hasn't quite worked that way, perhaps the way he's handled this issue in a Colombian context might be considered to be more centrist than certainly right-wing or quote left-wing management of that issue. That fair?
Yes,
If we want to use labels, that's not necessary, but
yes, it would be fair, but I think it has to do more with headlines than reality, because if you turn back and see what's happening on the different Colombian frontiers and the dissidents of the FARC, the regular traffickers, the ELN, and so forth, it's going to turn into a little bit of a problem further on. We have a security problem. We have on the frontiers with Ecuador, things are better right now. But anyway, I think that he's going to have a security problem in the short term.
No, what I believe is that Duque would like to move towards the center, but my prediction is that he's going to be forced to move to the right, because he is going to be convinced that he has to go to the roots of the Democratic Center Party, which are
right-wing,
located in the right.
Even though,
and I believe that's going to be that would be another mistake in his part. Let's hope that he tries to conquer the center. That's where his stability lies.
well, isn't that then also incumbent on the center, the political center, to make space for him? So in fact, he can feel like he has some support there, so he can work from operators. Isn't there some obligation there on the quote center, the more centrist politicians, to make space for him?
I haven't seen any centrist politicians right now. I don't know. I was listening to Ricardo and I was thinking, okay, what's like the center who would receive Duque or something like that? I don't see it right now, like a structure center. And I have to remind you again that next year we will have local elections, and all the political parties are fighting for the local control, because that will be decisive on the presidency 2022. So everybody's trying to move towards how to gain or to retain power on the territory of all of Colombia, the main cities and all the municipalities. So.
Yes. Do you want to?
No. I believe that that's one of the reasons why Duque will try, who has tried to open that door, might find that it's closed permanently, and that's why he might stay in the right. I don't know. Let's hope that things change, but I'm not very optimistic about that.
Well, we will reconvene again, as we always do, bi-monthly, and by then things will look a lot better in Colombia.
Hopefully,
we all predict that. We all want it. So with that, we'll bring it to this fourth edition of Live from Colombia to a close. Again, thank you, Poli. Thank you, Ricardo.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you for hosting us again. And we'll be back on the other side of the new year with another edition. Thank you for joining us today.